Going to keep us rolling. I think we are set to end at 4. I may go just a few minutes over. For those of you who aren't from California, you are welcome to hit happy hour early or whatever it is you would like to do. You're also very welcome to stay. I think California has some of the best water quality rules that are out there, so you might, learn something you want to apply to your home state. I was recently in West Virginia at the National Water Quality, or the National TMDL conference, and there were so many times I heard people say, you can do that in California? And it really is quite amazing. We have the Port of Cologne Water Quality Control Act. I'm going to get to this, our water code. And it really is quite amazing to realize what we have as far as authority to implement actions needed to meet the standards that we put into place here, which a lot of other states do not have. And that includes surface waters, it includes groundwaters, and it includes non-point sources like agriculture. And it's something that really is unique and wonderful to us. So I'll just start with that. It's kind of my perspective. And we have Yosemite, and we have the beaches, and we have the mountains and the deserts, and we have almost everything and every pollutant that every other state is dealing with, we have in California. So it's quite a wonderful, wonderful place to be. So what I want to say is that my goal in all of my California-specific presentations this week is really just to highlight the what. What is it that we have? What are our policies? What are our plans? What are our objectives and uses? And to give you guys some links to go and find more information, because there is no way that I can cover all of the specifics about all of our various objectives and implementation requirements that we have. So that's really the kind of threshold I'm trying to do here. One thing I did do is I brought my copies of all of our regional basin plans, as well as some of the old historic documents that EPA has put out establishing criteria. So that's there in case you guys do have any questions that's specific to what you're working on. I always end up flipping back to your basin plans every time you guys have a question, and I hope that it's something that you guys do regularly too when you're implementing standards, that you have your basin plan next to you, that you have our water quality control plans at the state level next to you, so you can go back and refer to what you need. And of course, Port of Cologne, our little Bible. So I'm going to skim through some of these because I think they've already been pretty well discussed, but there is a little difference in California nomenclature and California authority. So some of our authority, and hey, look, there's a screen in the back of the room. So we already covered some of the federal authority pieces. Our statute is the Port of Cologne Water Quality Control Act, which predates the Clean Water Act. And you can see there where it is codified in the water code and where our regulations are as well. It's really important to know that for the purposes of all of the Clean Water Act standards information that you guys are hearing about this week, California's Water Pollution Control Agency for Clean Water Act purposes is us. It's the State Water Resources Control Board and the Regional Water Quality Control Boards. So we get to have all the fun. As far as waters and which water bodies apply to the U.S. versus apply to the state, this is an incredible simplification of what we heard this morning as far as waters of the U.S., but you can see that at least on the state side, what is a water of the state? We have not just surface waters, not just navigable waters, but non-navigable surface waters. And of course, we include groundwaters in what we consider water of the state as well. As far as ocean waters go, our authority goes out 3 miles, not 12 nautical miles, whatever that translates into in miles. So those are the waters that we spend our careers working to protect. Some differences in terminology. You've heard a lot already about designated uses, water quality criteria. In California, we use the term beneficial uses, water quality objectives, and I included on this slide, which is a slight correction to what you have printed out, Also, our programs of implementation, because I think that more or less when we all are looking at the work that we do and we think about kind of standards in the maybe not legal definition sense, but in what we're really working on, we're working on uses, objectives, and the programs of implementation that need to be put into place to try to attain those uses and objectives. Where can you find all of our standards? You can find them in our regional water quality control plans, which are colloquially known as our Basin Plans. That's what all those binders are over there. You can find them in the statewide water quality control plans, namely the Ocean Plan, the Thermal Plan. There's a few of them. I'm going to run through those. And you can also find them in a little bit harder way in the California Toxics Rule. And I'm going to speak to each one of these. But these are the three groups of documents that include our uses and our objectives. So we have 9 regional water quality control boards across the state. Love that everybody but one is here. And we have 10 basin plans or regional water quality control plans across the state. And that's because Region 5, being so large, has 2. So their Sacramento River and their San Joaquin River basins are in one basin plan, and then the Tulare Basin is in another one. So we have 10 basin plans. I hope you guys can see that. So this is, then we have quite a few actually statewide water quality control plans. And I think that at least when I worked at Region 1 in the North Coast region, I didn't think about these very often. But now that I'm here at the state board, I do. And they're really important, and I think that sometimes they're overlooked. And there are quite a few out there, and there's a little bit of history here, so I'm going to go through this. So we have our Ocean Plan. These over here are kind of the shorthand, easy to remember names that you'll hear us throw around. And then these are the more formal titles. Our Water Quality Control Plan for Ocean Waters of California, that handles all of our ocean waters. And we have also an Enclosed Bays and Estuaries Plan, which right now currently contains the sediment quality objectives, which were just adopted and approved by the EPA. And we used to have an inland surface waters plan. So between the three, we used to capture all of our water bodies. The inland surface waters plan was rescinded in '94. There is a history there I'm not going to go into, but currently we don't have an inland surface waters plan. We are in the process of creating and have created parts of what will be the Inland Surface Waters, Enclosed Bays, and Estuaries Plan. Basically, it's going to handle all the waters that are not ocean waters. We call it the SWRCB Plan. One of these wonderful people out there who are more creative than I am, if you have a little bit better name, now's the time to share it because we're starting to get used to the term SWRCB. But it really isn't the most probably easiest way to say it's our non-oceans waters plan. Jen.
Is part 1, the sediment quality objectives, going to roll into a SWRCB?
It will. It will. So there are several parts of the SWRCB that have already been established and are already in effect. Because we have not yet created that vessel that's going to hold all these various parts, they're kind of known as Part 1, Part 2, and so on. So our statewide trash provisions, the mercury water quality objectives, and the tribal subsistence beneficial use definitions, which we've already been talking about a little bit today, those are in Part 2. Those are in effect. We have bacteria provisions and a water quality standards variance policy. Those are in effect as of February for California purposes and March for federal purposes. So you'll hear more about variance later this week. And the State Water Board has recently adopted our new wetland definition and our dredge and fill procedures. Those are not yet in effect because they haven't been approved by EPA yet. And I don't think they've been approved by Office of Administrative Law. We are currently working on is a formal establishment of the whole SWRCB vessel, which will be our toxicity provisions. And we are going to then follow that with another rulemaking that puts all of these various parts, including the sediment quality objectives, into a nice one document that I can put on a table and show everybody in the future. And then at the state level, we're also working on an amendment for urban pesticides. So you've probably heard in passing, the State Water Board is working on this and is working on that, and these are our water quality control plans that most of them have fit into. We also have a thermal plan for coastal and interstate waters, enclosed bays and estuaries, and the Bay Delta plan specific to the Bay and the Delta, and that has some of the salinity objectives and some flow ramifications that has been the subject of a lot of hearings and interest at the State Water Board level over the past year. Any questions on that?
Are there revisions to the thermal plan that are pending?
There are none on my plate at the moment. Do you have one for me?
No, I feel like I read a notice on our website that was talking about potentially revisiting that, and I just thought I'd follow that thread since
Yeah,
you're
no,
right
not
there.
that I know of. There might be something out there, but I don't know about it yet.
If there's something in our basin plan that predates something that comes out, does this override that?
So statewide water quality control plans supersede regional basin plans when there is a conflict. And there's some, usually with each part that we have adopted or amendment that we have adopted, there's some specific language speaking to what does or does not supersede what is in basin plans. So the other place where we contain our standards, especially our water quality objectives, is in the California Toxics Rule. So the history with, first of all, I should say that this primarily includes priority pollutants like metals, dioxins, those sorts of pollutants. And there's a lot of history associated with when we pulled back the Inland Surface Waters Plan. When that was rescinded, EPA stepped in and promulgated on behalf of California our toxic criteria. I should know this, but I'm going to ask. These are 303C criteria that are established in the California Toxics Rule. They're not recommended. These are considered our objectives. These are have the force and effect of criteria objectives for us. And I will say, I put on a bullet here and I'll highlight that if we have a water quality objective for one of these pollutants in a basin plan, and it also exists in the California Toxics Rule for the same pollutant, the more stringent of the two applies. And there's links so you can find it. And if you open it up, it looks very similar to that table with the chronic and the acute freshwater and marine water table that Terry just showed in his slide. It's very similar to that, and there are 23 aquatic life criteria, 57 human health criteria. So it's quite a list, and it's something I think that, again, we often overlook when we're looking for what an objective is for one of our pollutants, because it's not in our basin plans.
Rebecca? So if there are things in basin plans that contradict the CTR, you should keep a list of those, and then we'll depromulgate.
Oh,
We don't want to do it just for one thing.
if it's more stringent,
So the state needs to decide what
which one would apply?
exactly.
All right. Okay. You should write me an email about that so I remember. All right. So I'm going to walk through now a little bit about what's in each one of our plans, just a bit more. Our water quality control plan contents, I think you guys know this by now, but they include all of our beneficial uses, our designated uses, if you want to use the federal term. And these are, I just threw a few of them up there on the slide: municipal and drinking water supply, Navigation, Rec 1 is our primary water contact use. Rec 2 is non-water contact. We have some new definitions now in place of cultural and tribal tradition, tribal subsistence fishing, and then I put up our cold water fishery, warm water fishery, spawning, and there's quite a few more. And the place to go to find not only the definitions, but the designations to individual water bodies is the Basin Plan for your region. And then our water quality objectives, very similar to what you just heard about criteria. They are the limits or the levels for reasonable protection of beneficial uses or the prevention of nuisance. And then our basin plans also, and our water quality control plans, they also contain programs of implementation, which is, again, one of those things that really makes California special. We get to say what needs to happen, the nature of the actions that are necessary to achieve our objectives, a time schedule for implementing those actions, as well as a monitoring plan to make sure that they're happening or if we need to make changes along the way. So a few little nuances and details about beneficial uses in California. We kind of got into this in some of the discussion earlier. We have both existing and probable uses. And just to repeat what we were talking about, an existing use is a use as actually attained in a water body on or after that November 28th, 1975 date, whether or not it is actually listed in Table 2.1 of your basin plan. Our existing uses must be protected, and again, it cites back to our federal Code of Federal Regulations there. Probable uses may include past uses of water, something that happened before that 1975 date. They may be aspirational, as you were hearing earlier today. They could include plans to put water to a future use. And one thing that I'll highlight is that it can also be identified as a probable use under statewide policy. For example, we have a sources of drinking water policy, which put the municipal use, the municipal and domestic drinking water supply use on almost all of California surface waters. I also want to just call out that there is a distinction for uses between the definition and the designation. So at the beginning of Chapter 2 of our basin plans and in some of our water quality control plan parts now, we have definitions in place that are mostly consistent region to region and across the state for what is our beneficial uses. There's some differences now with some of the tribal uses, but they're mostly consistent. We have a few new ones that may not yet be reflected in individual regions' basin plans. For, again, subsistence fishing, tribal subsistence fishing, the cultural, tribal, and traditional use, and the limited recreational use. All of those are fairly new definitions that you are going to find in the statewide water quality control plans. And then it's the region's job on whole to do the specific linking of those beneficial uses to the individual water bodies. And it can apply for a reach. You can designate a beneficial use to a reach of a water body. You can do it for an entire hydrologic unit. And I also want to highlight that we have a tributary rule here in California so that the uses of any specifically identified water body generally apply to the tributaries to that water body. So you will not find all of your creeks listed in your basin plan, but you probably will find your main rivers, and then you just apply those uses to its tributaries. Lori.
Just a question. So if a region is applying a new beneficial use, would they, or assigning a new beneficial use to one of their water bodies, can they do assign either an existing or a probable?
I would say yes.
Because it's their choice. So if they assigned probable, it would be more kind of aspirational.
Yes.
And existing would be based on existing data that exists.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole. Sorry.
Yeah, that's true, and I know that I think Region 5, they wanted to remove the actual identification of whether the use that was designated in their plans was existing or probable, and so I'm not privy to the rationale behind that, but I know that as a matter of law, you still have to protect the use in accordance with the Clean Water Act as to whether it satisfies that existing federal regulatory definition, regardless as to whether they took the E away from that water body designation.
Jen?
Kind of following up on that, I guess, then, if something was not attained after 1975, can you still call it an existing use? I'm thinking tribal. I mean, if it's not being attained since then,
I think
can you still call it an existing, or do you have to call it probable?
if you want to, it depends what you want to, why you want to attach a label to it. But if you're going to attach it for legal purposes, it would be a case-by-case situation as to whether that federal definition, whether those two criterions are satisfied. And if they both are not, then appropriately it should be viewed as a probable use, which is more of a strict goal use, aspirational, which can be informed by, that it occurred in the past. Perhaps not since 1975, but based on a past use and other priorities that we have, we can assign it as a probable use.
I'm going to move on to objectives next. Any other questions on uses? Yeah.
She said after 1975, but if it was attained on November 28th, 1975, then it's an existing use. So if it's on that date, even afterwards, it's still an existing use.
Yes, it's on or after that date. And I don't know what that date is.
November 28th.
Yeah, no. Why is it that day? EPA's, I think, Terry, do you know what it is? Do you know, Stacy? Is it, I always think of 1972 as the establishment of the act.
EPA promulgated its original water quality standards regulation on November 28th, 1975, which is the reason for this index date.
All right, there we go. There we go. I would say you learn something new every day, but I've learned a lot new today. So, all right, let's move on to objectives. So just a few things I want to highlight that's unique to California when we are looking at our water quality objectives. The Water Code, Section 13241, requires us to consider certain things when we're establishing objectives. The past, present, probable future uses, environmental characteristics of the hydrologic unit, I should have spelled that out, need to develop housing, need to develop and use recycled water. But the economic considerations bullet there is really the highlight, and it's something that I think we all need to be aware of when we are setting objectives. We need to look at what is appropriate, a level that is appropriate for reasonable protection of the uses, and the economic factor does come into play. So that's why we do economic analyses when we're doing our standard setting. And I wanted just to make sure that you guys were aware of this. Further conversations about that will have to wait for a different class. I should also say, while we're talking about objectives, just like they can be with criteria, they can be narrative and they can be numeric. And we have quite a few instances of both throughout our water quality control plans of like toxicity. Our narrative is no toxic and toxic amounts, more or less. No suspended sediment in amounts that's going to have a deleterious effect on beneficial uses. And then we also can have very specific numbers as well. So I wanted to touch a little bit on the differences between water quality control plans and water quality control policies, because there certainly are both within our world. Our water quality control plans are our basin plans, our statewide plans. They include our uses, objectives, programs of implementation. I already mentioned in answer to a question that some of our statewide plans will supersede the regional basin plans where there is a conflict for the same water body. our plans need to conform with our policies, so there is a link between the two. And our plans also should be reviewed triennially according to the Clean Water Act or periodically according to the Water Code. So we do a lot of work these days on the water quality control planning side of the world. A policy is, it's there in order to provide direction, to provide intent. At a statewide level, when we set a statewide policy, it does not supersede what a regional board has in their basin plan. And that's probably one of the main differences in using a policy versus a plan at a statewide level. Although regions do need to conform their actions to policies, and they also should be reviewed periodically, although we have not been too much in the practice of doing that. So we have a whole host of statewide policies that have been developed over the years. Almost every program that we have in the water boards has a policy associated with that program. You can look at this list and almost pick out your favorite. And the impaired waters policy is one that we will talk about this week in touching on 303D listed waters and how we do TMDLs. The listing policy gets into how we actually assess our waters and establish the 303D list. There are a lot of good policies out there. We have a non-point source policy that looks at how we implement discharges from non-point sources. We have our anti-degradation policy, which is similar, but not quite exactly like the federal anti-degradation policy. So there are lots and lots of good ones out there. And again, it's really good to know that these exist in case you need to use them. So where can you find them all? Thanks in large part to Stacy's work and some of our other staff's effort, we have a great little, well, it's not too little, is it? A great web page that lists out, has links to all of our statewide plans, all of our statewide policies. It has links to each of the regional basin plans. And it's a very nice one-stop shop where you can find what the actual language is of the plan or the policy, as well as then it gives you to the program page. So if you need to find the staff report or the adopting resolution's right on this main page. If you need to find the staff report, the response to comments, or any of the other documents that went into establishing these, you can get them right from that page. And then there's the link to the California Toxics Rule as well. And that's my presentation. Ooh, went faster than I expected. I'm not going, like I said, I'm not going to talk about all of these. I'm going to touch on a few, and a few of our uses and objectives as they relate to what we're going to hear from EPA the rest of the week. So if you have any questions about anything that you're struggling with, come and find me at a break or at lunch. We also have some time Friday morning to handle specific questions about anything you guys are working on. So that's just another opportunity to keep in mind. All right. Any questions? Well, that's Tuesday. We don't want to go to Tuesday yet.
Approved by the state?
They do. So any sort of water quality control plan amendment also is approved at the state or at the regional water board level, and then it comes to the state water board for approval as well. And I will just say that the whole process for amending our basin plans is the subject of another multi-day class. So when we start getting into the procedures with all of our public outreach, with our board adoption process, with the fact that we do any amendment needs to look at all of our environmental impacts. We do a functional equivalence document, the economic analysis. We do peer review on any of the scientific portions. So all of that, I didn't want to, it's good to raise it because it is really important for us to know that anytime we do a new use, we do a new standard, we do a new TMDL or implementation plan, it is a multi-year serious effort that requires a lot of time, dedication, and public involvement. So it's good to keep that in mind.
Quick question: If regions create a policy at the regional level, are there any state board or
Are there
steps?
regional board policies? Is that the question?
No. If we create a policy directing our region to take certain actions, would there be an analysis at state board or any other steps like that? OAL?
I'll have Stacy answer that. I think
So maybe one of the regional board attorneys here can help me out, but I don't believe the water code has, provides authority for the regional boards to establish water quality control policies. I think that authority is assigned to the state water board. If the regional board did have that authority, there is not a statute on point that requires the state board to also approve. But certainly if it's a rulemaking, the Office of Administrative Law would have to approve, and potentially EPA also would have to approve if its implementation or enforcement affects water quality standards. Anybody from the regional board want to correct or augment what I said? Okay.
Well, maybe when I'm not recorded, I'll tell. No, I'm pretty sure when I was working for Region 1 that we put in some policies, but they might have been lowercase p policies, right? General direction to regional board staff on an action to take or work to, priorities for work, that kind of a not so much a capital P rulemaking policy.
Yeah. I believe that's correct.
Anything else?
I was wondering if you could think of any instances where site-specific water quality objectives would supersede, for a particular region, would supersede the statewide objective.
Yes, it can happen. For example, with bacteria is a good example.
Right, with bacteria, we specifically clarified in the statewide plan that it didn't to supersede site-specific water quality objectives because we wanted to make sure that the objectives that we are establishing statewide, which for the most part were premised on EPA's 304A recommendations, we didn't disrupt the more site-specific analysis that was done for the site-specific water quality objectives, so that would be a situation.
Yep. And there's going to be a similar situation with our toxicity water quality objectives that we're working on currently, where if there's a site-specific one in place, it should remain in place.
Okay, I want to thank you for that clarification for slide 14. It's the fourth bullet down on the left side.
This one?
Yeah.
Well, you're welcome. Good, good. I know there's a lot of confusion on that.
I'll just note it.
All right.
Well, so yeah, and oftentimes, I mean, that bullet point comes from the water code, so that's just a legal maxim. But so what we do in our statewide plans is to ensure we keep the site-specific objectives in place, knowing there would be a conflict. So we add in our statewide plans, this water quality objective for bacteria does not supersede site-specific objectives, because in the absence of that language, there would be a conflict, and the statewide objective would automatically supersede.
I agree, and I think it ought to be included in the overhead.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
That was the reason I brought it up.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point, and this was intended as more of a generalistic overview, and that's more of a nuance of the legal proposition.
Good point, though.
But yeah, very good point.
All right.
Rebecca, can we leave everything in the room?
Yeah,
or-
you know what, if you are, yeah, I would leave anything in the room that you're, not too worried about. I don't think I would leave a computer in the room overnight, but I would be fine, and leaving your documents. Yes, those I think you can very safely leave. All right, so what time are we starting tomorrow morning? 8:30. All right. Thank you all very much.